So, so this morning I went through this and I had every good intention. I'm going to recalibrate my study going forward because I didn't get very far again. And I am prepared to go through all this other stuff and I didn't get there. So I've got to get out of preacher mode, teaching mode, something here and get back into teaching mode so I can move faster. Try to pick back up tonight or next time for sure. Tonight won't get as far as I don't want to get too far ahead of the other class. But we start out tonight. We're leaving off Abraham. Abraham has died at this point, or is dying. And after Abraham before Abraham dies, we just need to talk about the fact that, just a reminder that he went and got that other wife Keturah and had 6 sons through him. And when Abraham dies, he ends up actually giving gifts to his sons. So all of his sons, think Ishmael and his 6 sons with Keturah, and he gives gifts to them, but he gives the blessing, the actual blessing goes to his son Isaac. And I've given everybody a copy of this patriarchal family tree, and this is good. This is good to hang on to. It helps you kind of see the line of how it all came about with the patriarchs in the beginning. And so I gave that out because we're going to go through a good portion of that tonight, as we will see. But what we'll see here is just before Abraham died, when he knew he was going to die, he asked that trusted servant of his, Eleazar. Eleazar was the one who was kind of his vice regent. He was the one who was kind of the head of the family. He'd been with Abraham from the beginning. This is who everything would have went to. All of the wealth, everything, the inheritance would have went to if Abraham had not had a son. But Eleazar is still with Abraham. I'm in about chapter 24 of Genesis. And this, what's going on here is Abraham's son is getting old enough. It's time for him to find a wife. And Abraham says, look, I don't want my son to find a wife here among the Canaanite women because of the fact that they worship idols. They do some things that are not so good. And so we actually see Abraham going to his servant and saying, would you go back to my homeland? Go back to where I was from before we came here, where my brother's at. He still has another brother up there. He says, go back there if you would and find a wife for my son, from our family, from those who know and know what we believe. And so, this is one of those opportunities that we talk about being unequally yoked. And when I taught this at high school, I had a lot of kids in their high school age, and I talked to them a lot about being unequally yoked and how dangerous it is. The Bible speaks on this often, that we're to find a partner, look for someone who knows the Lord. And I'll say it. I keep saying that if you find a partner that knows Jesus and that loves Jesus, he'll love you best. He'll love you better. If he'll give his heart to the Lord, he'll surely give you his heart, or her heart. So this, and I talk about this. We'll find verses in Exodus, in Deuteronomy, in Ezra. 2 Corinthians 6:14 is a good place to reference. All those talk about being unequally yoked and the dangers of it there. Look for someone that knows Jesus. But that's really what he's doing here. He says he's the son of promise. So Isaac is the son of promise, and I'd like for you to go find a wife for him that doesn't worship idols and that loves the Lord. So that's what Eleazar is challenged with, to go find a wife. Now this is not going to be an easy task. I don't have my map over here, but we're down in the southern part of Canaan, the Promised Land. He's got to go back up to that place Haran, and that Haran is a long ways away. In fact, it's 500 miles away. And so what we see here is Eleazar, he kind of says, what do I do, Abraham, if I get there and I can't find a wife? And he says, I just want you to go. Look, and the angels of the Lord will go with you. They'll go before you. And if you can't find a wife for him, there's no more oath between us. You just do what you can do, but let the Lord lead you. And so Eleazar takes off with 10 camels. Remember, Abraham has been blessed and blessed and blessed by God. He's become a very wealthy man. And so Eleazar loads up 10 camels with all kinds of treasures and gifts and different things, and takes off on this 500-mile journey back to Haran to find a wife for Isaac. And the way the story goes, and I know many of you know it, but when he gets back there, he travels all that way. When he thinks he's there, he comes to a well. And when he gets to this well, the first thing he does, and this is a great example of how we should all do, he prays to God. The first thing he does, and this is only, I think, the second time a prayer is recorded in the Bible thus far. I think Abraham's the only other one that has a recorded prayer. But he says, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am staying at the spring of water." And he says, "Let the young maiden to whom I shall say, please let down your jars so that I can have a drink." And she does that, and then offers to also water my camels. Let her be the one. Let that be the sign. And I comment on this often. We sometimes our prayers are so broad that we don't give God an opportunity to answer our prayers. We give such an opening. Sometimes we need to pray specifically. Be specific, and he is very specific in this when he asks for this. And what we see is, this is what's awesome. I love it. Basically, the Bible says before he had finished praying the prayer, here comes this maiden named Rebecca. and Rebecca comes down. It says, before he had finished speaking, excuse me, behold, Rebecca, who was born to Bethuel, the wife of Nahor, which is Abraham's brother, here she come down with a water jar on her shoulder. And it says the young woman was very attractive. She looked to be the right age. She was a young maiden. And so he asked her, he says, "Hey, would you give me a drink?" And we know that Rebecca gives him a drink, draws water for him from the well, and then she offers to water his camels. And so he asks her who she is, finds out that she is of the family that he's there to find. It's Abraham's brother's family. So he is elated, knows that God has answered that prayer that he just was praying. Right before he even got finished, here she came. And so, and I talked at one time, I mentioned this, I think in a I don't know if it was a sermon or a teaching or what, but she offered to water those camels. Well, you think about, a well, and this is not something, the water normally is not right there. It's down in the well. In the Eastern culture, it's pretty deep to get down to the water level. And she gave him a drink, and then she offered to draw water for the camels. Now, the average camel, they can go for long distances without drinking. That's kind of their thing. But when they drink, they just consume it all at once. They just consume vast quantities of water, and then they can persist for a long time after that. So the average camel, when it drinks 30 gallons of water. And so this young maiden offered to water 10 camels. So it's pretty easy to do the math. 300 gallons of water she's going to try to draw up out of a well. So right off the bat, we know a few things about her. We know she's got that servant's heart about her and being willing to do such a thing as this. And we know she's pretty stout to be able to do something like this as well, and a hard worker. But anyway, so when she does this, he sees this as an answer to prayer. She does everything, finds out who she is, and so he's elated, and he ends up giving her some gifts already. He gives her some bracelets and some earrings, whatever, gold, and asks her, "Hey, can I come back to the family, meet the family?" All this stuff happens, and she says, "Of course, you can come back, and I'll introduce you to my father," and all that. So he goes back, and the next character we meet when she gets back home is her brother, Rebecca's brother, and his name is Laban. And we're going to hear a lot more about Laban later on, but what we'll see about Laban is as soon as he saw the sparkly bracelets of gold, suddenly his eyes lit up. And Laban was suddenly very interested in who this stranger was, and it was a lot because of the money. He was kind of a money-hungry guy. And but that's Rebecca's brother Laban. So we know that Eliezer comes back and he meets up with the family. And the next thing that Laban does is he prays again, and he asks if this would be possible. Tells him the story. Hey, here's what I am. I'm representing your brother Abraham, and I come here to fetch a wife for his son Isaac. And he's a great guy. You're going to love him, but would you be willing to let Rebecca come back with me and marry this guy that she doesn't know, 500 miles away from here? Chances are you'll never see her again. You'll never see your family again, Rebecca. Would you want to go do this thing? And so what a leap of faith this was. What a thing it would have been. And but we know that she does agree in the end to go back. And so and Abraham gives gifts to the family, more gifts to the family, showers them with gifts, and takes Rebecca and heads back this great distance back to see Isaac, the man she had never seen. And it's kind of a neat story. If you read toward the end of chapter 24, when they get back and they're still a way off, it says Isaac had went out into the field to meditate or to pray. And he's out there in the field, and here comes the camels on the return trip. And Isaac looks up, and it's kind of like you can almost play the romantic music in the background as you're doing this. You can kind of see them, because she says, "Who is this?" Now, if you read the language, if you read between the lines of the language, it says, she kind of looks up there, and it says something along the lines, here, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" He must have been a hunk, I'm guessing here, the way she says it. The Bible tells us over and over again how beautiful Rebekah was. And it says that she lifted up her eyes. When she saw Isaac, she dismounted and walked over to him, and he's coming to her, and it is a love story here. It says that Isaac loved her. It says he loved her, was comforted by her after his mother had passed away, and things sound great, like they're going to live happily ever after. We know that there's some trouble brewing in this relationship, as far as their kids are concerned, but it seems like they truly have a great love story here. But anyway, so chapter 25 is where Abraham talks about him marrying Keturah, that next wife, and he dies in that chapter 25. We've already talked about that. It's buried in the cave. The one place he bought, the only thing he bought in all the promised land was a tomb, was a cave to be buried in, and he's buried in that tomb by his wife Sarah, his first wife Sarah. And so we think about Rebekah and Isaac. Isaac was that son of promise, and so through him is going to go that blessing that God has given to Abraham. It's going to carry on through Isaac. There are people that read the Bible and they'll say, I've heard people will say things along the lines of, the Bible is full of just men and women that aren't like us. There's miracles, there's all this stuff going on. It's not like us. But if someone says that, they're revealing to you that they've probably never read the Bible. Because the Bible, if you look at the characters, and as we're getting ready to see, their lives, and as we've already seen in Abraham, this great father of faith, and Isaac, they kind of do stupid things there around, and they lie, they're just up and down in their faith, and what we see is real life. And you'll see that, it's hard as you're reading these stories. It's like, man, I want this guy to be my hero here. I'm looking for the hero of the story, but then he does stupid things. What in the world? And what you'll discover as you read through the Word of God is that none of these guys fit the mold of what we would think of as a hero or a heroine. What we see is that God is the hero of the Bible. God's the hero of the story, and so that's what's really going on here. And I think it's a beautiful thing, because we see that the men of the Bible, these great men that were considered great men of faith, great women of faith, they screwed up. They messed up. You know what they were like? They were like us. They're real people that really have problems and mess up. But then here comes God, and here comes grace. Here comes mercy. And ultimately, God is the hero of the story always. That's what we find in the end. So Isaac. So let's talk about Jacob. Because what we'll see here is Rebekah and Isaac, she has a problem where she can't have children. And just like Sarah, the same thing. She's barren as well. They go 20 years without having a child. Can you imagine? There's so many people that battle with infertility, and what a horrible thing infertility is. And they go 20 years without having a child. And so finally, Isaac is praying for his wife. And we'll see God hears that prayer. And just like today, a lot of times people that struggle with infertility, they're going to the doctor, they're trying everything. And a lot of times when they have a child, they'll have more than one. And that's what God blessed Isaac and Rebekah with here. They have 2 children. She has twins. And I know many know the story. But those twins, when they were in her belly, started wrestling around and fighting with each other in her belly. So much to the point where she asked God, what is going on here? This is more than gas. These kids are fighting in my stomach here. Something's going on. And so God actually answers her question, and he says there's 2 nations inside of you. And so there's two boys that are going to grow into men who are going to be the founders of great nations. They're going to be great nations. And so that's an awesome thing to think about. Wow. But she says, or God says there's something unique about him in the fact that the younger is going to rule over the older. And so we get a little clue in there on some things that are going to happen. When they're born, Esau and Jacob. Esau was born first. Let me get to going on some of these. Okay, so Jacob's brother was Esau. And Esau was born first. And this boy, if you look in the Bible, the word describes him. It's hard to read almost. Something like, my goodness, how much hair this boy had. He was hairy like a garment, they said, when he was born. He had a ton of hair on him. When Caden was born, he needed a haircut, but I don't think he was as bad as this boy is described in Esau. He had hair all over him. He was redheaded. He was a redheaded boy, and the Bible talks about it. In fact, Esau means red. And so Esau was the name for that. His redheaded. He was so redheaded they named him after that. So Esau was redheaded and hairy, and he came out of the womb. And here comes the second-born Jacob, Jacob's second-born, and has a hold of the heel of his older brother as he's born. He comes out holding on to his heel, and they name him Jacob. And Jacob, the name means heel grabber or deceiver. And this is extremely important because this is going to describe the character of Jacob for a better part of his life, his younger life. Jacob, the heel grabber, the deceiver is what that name means. And you think about it this way, heel grabber, deceiver. If you think about someone running in a race, when two people are running, or a bunch of people are running a race, somebody that will trip up the guy in front of him to make him fall in order to win the race, that's a heel grabber. And so in a wrestling match or whatever, somebody that might do something illegal, but the heel grabber, the thought, the mindset behind it, you don't actually usually grab somebody, you trip them with your foot in a race, but that's what the terminology is. You're a heel grabber, you trip somebody up in a race we're trying to run in order you can win. And so that's the meaning behind that. And he's a deceiver. That's the name, deceiver. And Esau, now Esau was a great hunter. So think about these two men, these two young boys, as they grow up. Esau becomes this great, skillful hunter. He is a man's man. He is the jock. And listen, Isaac loves him. Isaac thinks, that's my boy there. He's a stud. But Jacob, it says, he liked to dwell in tents. So Jacob's kind of a mama's boy. He likes to dwell in tents and probably cook with mom and all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. But that they're just different. They're just different. And so we see here that Rebekah, now she was partial to Jacob. They hung out in the tent together. They talked a lot. This is just the way it goes. And so the boys are different in that way. And when we think about these two, I got some things up here. I'll tell you about them here. Let me put this up here. 4 interactions between Jacob and Esau. They fought before birth, but Esau was born first. I've done talked about some. Jacob took advantage of Esau and took his birthright. Okay, so that is the next event that we'll see. As these boys get gained in age, the great hunter Esau comes in one day, and this day didn't go so well. He didn't come home with any venison or whatever it might have been. And so he's been out hunting or working all day, and he is starving to death. And here's Jacob cooking a pot of what it is. Basically, the Bible describes it's a pot of red stew, red lentil bean stew. And so lentil means bean. So he's there cooking this red stew. And some people say that's more about where Esau too. Red hair, red stew. He's kind of known for this. But he comes in, he's starving to death, and he says, "Give me some of that stew." And Jacob proposes this idea. He said, "I'll give it to you for the birthright." And Esau says, "Fine, whatever. Just I gotta have it. I'm about to die here." I bet it smelled great. And I know I've been pretty hungry before, but this thing that he does, we see it in the New Testament, and man, oh man, and all through the Old Testament. We'll see the language later on as we go through the Bible, but they're awful hard on Esau for doing this. What was the big deal here? What is the deal with? Why is it such a big deal? It says that there's one verse in the New Testament that says God hated Esau because of what he did here, because he despised the birthright. Now that word in the New Testament, when it says hate from God, it doesn't mean like we think of hate. It's more of despise, had contempt for. It was a bad thing. And God says that was an awful thing that he's done here. But why is it so bad? What's this about? But he gives up this birthright. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Let me get through these. Jacob tricked his father to obtain the blessing. This is coming on our timeline. And Esau sought to kill Jacob. Is that on one of your sheets? It is, isn't it? Those are answers. Okay, so But what is the deal? I just need to talk to you about this birthright. Because see, later on we're going to be talking here a little bit about the blessing too that he gets tricked out of, Esau gets tricked out of. What's the deal with birthright and blessing? It's good to take time here to just take a moment and talk about what that's about. So, birthright. I'm going too fast. Birthright. Birthright, and this is a good way to think about this. What did he give up for that bowl of bean soup? That red stew, Esau gave up the birthright. Okay, Esau was the firstborn. The firstborn is given the birthright. And you get the birthright, the birth order. The firstborn male has this honor of being bestowed upon him to receive a double portion of the inheritance. Now, the way they did this is, let's say I had 5 kids. Okay, I got 5 kids born to me. What I'm going to do before I die, I am going to divide up everything that I have between 6. Okay, I'm going to pretend like I got 6 kids. I only got 5. I'm going to pretend like I have 6 kids. I'm going to divide everything up into 6 equal portions. And then that firstborn is going to get the 2. He's going to get that extra portion plus the normal portion that he would have got. So firstborn gets a double portion. Why in the world would I give the firstborn a double portion? Because he became the head of the family upon the father's death. So I want to give my eldest son a double portion because now he's going to take over my responsibilities. And so what I mean by that is you think about in this culture, think about Rebecca and Isaac. They had flocks and herds. They had servants that worked for them. And somebody's going to have to run the business. Somebody's going to run the family business. And here's the main thing. Somebody's going to take care of mama. Somebody's got to take care of my unmarried daughters. And so you're going to take my place, and in order to do so, I want to give you what you need to make sure the job gets done correctly. Now, if I took all that I had and divided up equally, and then made one son in charge of the family, I've kind of already, hamstringed him a little bit. He's going to have a hard time doing this. So I'm going to give him a double portion because he's taking care of mom, who's now a widow and has no one to care for her. He's taking care of those unwed daughters. He's taking care of the family business. All this is going on here, and so that's why that's what the birthright means. And he's also going to serve as the spiritual leader of the family, given great authority and honor. So now, when these 2 servants in the field get in a fight, and they get mad at each other, it's not my son that's in charge of figuring out what happens. The leader of the family is the one who's the judge. And so we're going to bring this spat to Dad. When Dad dies, he passes on the birthright, and that son now becomes judge. He's the one that's going to settle the arguments. He's the one going to decide whether it's time to pick up and move. He's the one that's going to be in charge and taking care of mom for the rest of the time. And so great authority and honor given. So next one is blessing. What's it mean with the blessing? Because we're getting ready to see what happens here with the blessing. The blessing is basically the transfer of family power from father to the eldest son. This is think of the blessing as the last will and testament. So in the last will and testament, birthright is going to go to this eldest son. Blessing I can give to any son or daughter that I want. Any child that I want can receive the blessing. And most often each child got the blessing. But there's the one that gets the ultimate blessing, that first blessing. And that almost always went to the firstborn child. The firstborn child usually received both the birthright and that first blessing. Then my other children are going to receive a blessing as well. But this here transfer of family power would go through the blessing. And it's the transfer of the covenant blessing in this instance. And so when Isaac blesses Esau, who he was going to bless, now Jacob steals that, but he's giving him that covenant blessing. It's a transfer of saying, here's what God said he's going to do for our family, and I'm passing that on to you. And so it is a neat thing. So that's kind of a little bit about the differences in birthright. Blessing is more spiritual. Blessing is the spiritual blessing, but it also is the transfer officially of power from the father to the eldest son. But like I said, the blessing can go to any son. You can choose to flip-flop that and give it to a different son. If one son or one daughter has done things they shouldn't have done, you don't feel they're ready for that, and they wouldn't be good at this job, you can choose a different one. But the birthright always went to the eldest, and the blessing always usually went to the eldest, but it could go to someone else. But all right, so we'll look here at the story of it before I go to this one. We can look to the story where it says that. So we know the story. What happened? We know that Jacob's the deceiver, but he kind of learns it from somewhere, doesn't he? Well, if you remember the story, Jacob learns this from Mom. Mom is kind of a little bit of a deceiver herself, and in fact, she's the one that was there and overheard Isaac saying that he thought he was in his last hours, his last days, he's going to die. And so Isaac calls in that favored son. We also know that's never good. That is never good to have a favorite son, to pick one out like that. A child, his favoritism doesn't work well, never goes well at all. But anyways, he picks that. He tells Esau, "Hey, I think I'm going to die. I think I'm in my last days. Would you fix me a good final meal?" He loves eating the venison, the Bible says, loves eating the game that Esau kills for him. He says, "Go kill something, prepare it, bring it back, and let's have that meal together. And then I'm gonna give that blessing, that actual spiritual blessing to you." And it's a big deal in Eastern culture. So we know in the background Rebecca's listening. She hears this, and so when Esau takes off to go hunting, she goes and gets Jacob and says, "Here's what we're going to do." And she says, "Go kill a couple goats here, bring them in here, and we're gonna do this thing." And so Jacob at first kind of questions it. Well, Dad will know, but see, Dad had this time his eyes had grown dim. The Bible says, so he's blind or nearly blind. And it says that the way it talks, he was laying in the bed, because when they come in later, they have to set him up. He's probably in a bad way here physically. But she says, "No, this is what we're going to do. Go with them." So he goes and gets them. They butcher them. They prepare the food. Rebecca prepares the food, the meal, and then she puts the coat of the goat on his hands, on the back of his neck. She puts Esau's clothes on Jacob. And then presents him, and he comes in with the food. And Isaac said, he asked, "Who is that goes there? Who is it?" And he said, and Jacob lies and says, "Well, it's Esau, and I brought the meal you asked for, and so that I can receive the blessing." And we do know that Isaac says, "That doesn't sound like my son's voice. That sounds like Jacob's voice." And he says, "Won't you come here a little closer?" And he does. He feels of him. They predicted right. And he feels that and says, "Well, he feels awful hairy." And he basically grabs him and gives him a little hug. And you can tell then it says it smells like Esau. So Isaac wasn't no dummy, but all the signs are there. And he says, "Okay," he's an elderly man at this time. Maybe his hearing wasn't as good either, and he probably thinks, "Well, maybe I just thought it sounded like Jacob." And so he proceeds to go ahead and give that blessing to Jacob. And it's a bad thing. There's nothing good going on with this. It doesn't seem like. It says he blessed him. He blesses. It gives him this blessing, this last will in the Testament, this spiritual blessing that is passed on to Jacob. And after this happens, Jacob heads on out. And here comes Esau in with his meal prepared, the game. And he comes in and says, "Here I am." And Isaac says, "Who's that?" And they figure it out real quick. And when they do, we hear Esau. He says he gets so mad he trembles all over. He is infuriated, and trembled violently. It says here that he says, "Is he not rightly named Jacob?" Esau says, "Is he not rightly named? Jacob the deceiver, the heel grabber. He's done it to me again." And he says, he stole the birthright. Now he stole the blessing. Really, the birthright was given up willingly over something stupid. Many people say, and we say this about Esau, but you got to understand that Esau willingly gave up that birthright, and for what reason, who knows? But when he gave that up, perhaps he's one of those guys. Have you ever heard anybody say, "I didn't think I was going to live this long, anyways"? I never thought I'd live this long. And Esau was this hunter, he was out living his life. We know he'd married 2 ladies from Canaan land already, Hittite women. So he had unequally yoked himself already. Usually the father would be the one who recommends a girl to be married. And so it sounds like Esau was a little bit rebellious. He went ahead and got him 2 wives anyways. And actually Rebekah was miserable. It tells us earlier these stepdaughters made her miserable. And because of this, she's going to use this as an excuse here in a minute. But when he despised that birthright, you look at this and maybe he said, I don't want to be the boss of this family. I want to do my own thing. I'm going to live my own life. And so when he said, I want the birthright, when Jacob said, I want the birthright, he willingly gave it up. Because obviously he didn't want to be the leader of the family. Maybe he didn't want that responsibility. We think about the language of the Bible sounds really hard on Esau, but really look what Esau did. This was a rebellious thing to do, to shirk his duties, so to speak. But he is infuriated over the blessing. He is infuriated over this. And Rebekah's listening again from the flap of the tent or whatever. She's listening again, and she overhears Esau saying, when Dad dies, I'm killing Jacob. And so she goes back and tells Jacob, listen, Esau is comforting himself right now in the fact that as soon as your dad dies, he's going to kill you. And I believe, just by the language of the Bible, I believe Esau could probably do it. And so she tells Jacob, we got to do something about it. So she goes to Esau with she goes to Isaac with another plan she's hatched. And which there's some truth tied to it, because she despised her daughters-in-law. They drove her nuts, the way the Bible says. And she goes to him and says, I loathe my life because of my daughters-in-law that Esau married. Please, please, please don't let Jacob marry one of these local Canaanite women that worship idols and all this stuff. And so that's what she asks Isaac to. Isaac then says, okay, we need to do this. And so Isaac gives the blessing to send Jacob away back to the land of Haran, back where he found his wife, where Rebekah's from. And she said, send him back to where I'm from, my brother Laban's there, and find a bride there among our family that we know the Lord and not like the women around here. So this is what happens. Jacob sets off. Jacob sets off with a staff and maybe a blanket. It sounds like he don't have much. He sets off and he's going to go on this big journey. The same journey Eleazar took earlier. We talked about looking for a wife for Isaac. Now Jacob himself is going to look for a wife, so to speak. Really, he's trying to get out of there because his brother's going to kill him. And so he goes back and he heads to Haran as well. Big, long, 500-mile journey for himself. Jacob stops along the way. That story that we're all familiar with. He gets worn out. His days of travel, it says, it's starting to grow into the evening. So he lays down and uses a rock for a pillow. I'm going to suggest that he probably used his cloak on that rock. He didn't just lay his head on an old hard rock. But he uses a rock as a pillow, goes to sleep, and God sends him this vision that we all think about, we call Jacob's ladder. And it looked like a ladder, think ladder or staircase, and it had angels descending and ascending to heaven. And Jacob sees in this vision, it sees the feet of God at the top, and these angels coming up and down on this. And it's a neat thing. What is that talking about? We think that God, God, I think through this vision of Jacob's ladder, it shows God's interaction, heavenly interaction with this earth, with the people of this earth. And that, some people get this thought. There's a thing called deism. And deism is something that's still strong, popular today, which says that I believe that God created the heavens and the earth, and then he took the big old earth in his hands and gave it a spin, and then he went back and he's doing whatever now. He's doing his own thing, and God's letting whatever happens with this earth, and he doesn't care about any of us. And really, the Jacob's ladder shows the care of God. The angels are coming and going, they're working, and they're in this life. And we'll see later in the New Testament, in the book of John, first chapter, if you read that, you'll see Jesus talks about this ladder. And really what Jesus reveals to us is Jesus is the door. He's the open doorway at the foot of that ladder that connects us. Jesus is the connection to us from heaven. And so it's just an awesome thing. But he has this dream. He wakes up from this dream. And there's this quote there where he says, surely God was here and I didn't know it. And surely the Lord was in this place, he says, and I was not aware of it. That's something we have to be careful for as Christians, that we don't miss God. God shows up in our life. We need to make sure we're paying attention. We don't want to miss God when he shows up. And that's what happened to Jacob here. He says, surely he was here and I didn't know it. And he talks about how awesome and wonderful this place must be. He says, this must be the house of God right here. And so he takes that rock that he was his head was on because he had this vision, dream through, picks that rock up, builds a little pillar and sets that rock on top and anoints it with oil. And he calls this place Bethel. And Beth means house, El is God, so it's house of God is what Bethel means. And so so here's this, he sets this up, but then I like this, I don't like this, but what he says here is kind of neat. If you catch this, Jacob makes a vow here. He makes a vow to God. So he makes a promise to God, who he's just saw in this vision. And he says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I can come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set upon a pillar, he says, this shall be a signature of God's house. Basically, he's not given his life to the Lord yet, but he's making a vow with God. God, if you hold up your end of the bargain, how many people do we know have done that through life? Many of us have done this where we'll say, God, if you get me through this, if you'll get me through this, I promise I'll be a better Christian. If you'll get me through this, I'll follow you all the days of my life. And then God gets us through it, and then a lot of times we turn around on our vow. But we're going to see, God is going to say, okay, Jacob, the deceiver, I'm going to start teaching you some things. And we're going to see a great character lesson in the life of Jacob coming up. Because Jacob shows up, he goes on traveling after this, and Jacob gets to, here we come to another well back in Haran, where Abraham's brother was from. Rebekah's brother, Laban, one of his daughters were there. So this is, remember, Jacob's, this would be Uncle Laban. And here comes, it's a cousin because it's one of Laban's daughters. Here she comes to the well. But Jacob shows up and he says, am I at the right place? They're saying yes. And he's at a well and they've got a lid on it. And what's going on? It's about the evening time, about the time that they would open the well. But it's still got a little while yet. And he says, am I in the right place? Yes, yes. Well, what's going on here is that water rights, just like today out west especially, water rights are huge. Water is expensive. It's hard to find. It's invaluable. So here comes all the herds coming in with their sheep, and they come in the evening, and they all will show up around a well, and they wait. This is was the common practice, and they all wait. But what they do is they put a gigantic stone lid on top of these wells so that nobody can show up and take that lid off and go ahead and water their sheep. I could have a lot healthier sheep than yours if I came here 2 or 3 times a day and watered mine. What if a foreigner comes into our land and steals our water, uses our water? So they would wait till the evening, and they made this lid so big that it took several of these shepherds to show up at once and get this lid shoved off so that we can begin watering all of our sheep. So everybody showed up at the same time so we can do this. Well, here's Jacob, Mama's boy, tent dweller. He's sitting here, and all of a sudden he looks up and sees Rachel coming. And Rachel, the shepherdess, here she comes, and he says, who is that girl? And she was beautiful and beautiful in appearance and all. And Jacob, Mama's boy, grabs hold of this stone lid and shoves it off by himself just to show off for the girl, which a lot of us guys tend to do, things like that. But Mama's boy no more. He shoves that lid off there by himself and to water her sheep. And the rest is going to be history as far as love at first sight between Jacob and Rachel. Jacob thinks he is smitten by her like his dad was with Rebekah. And so Jacob starts talking to Rachel and basically finds out that she's from the right family, all this stuff. And so he goes back and meets Laban, his uncle, his mom's brother. And what he's going to meet when he meets Laban is his match as far as deception comes. And Laban has another daughter named Leah. And so we have Leah and Rachel, the 2 daughters of Laban. The Bible is kind of a little bit hard on Leah. It says that she wasn't so pretty, according to the Word of God, especially not next to her sister Rachel, who was so beautiful. But, Jacob hangs out for about a month with the fam, and he's working with them, he's helping them out, doing things. And then Laban says, look, we're family, there's no reason for you just to work for free. What can I pay you? What's your wage? What would you like to have? If you're going to be here with us for a while, I'd like to pay you. And Jacob says, I'll tell you what, I'll work 7 years for you for the hand of your daughter Rachel in marriage. And so he agrees with this. Laban says, that's a deal. And so it's what he does. Now think about who Jacob is. Jacob has received the blessing from the family, and that blessing is the covenant blessing. What did God tell Abraham that was passed on to Isaac and now is in the hands of Jacob? He says, I'll bless you. He said, I'll make you fruitful, I'll bless you wherever you go, and I'll curse those who curse you. And so Jacob has this blessing of God on him, working on him. And so when Jacob goes to work here, Jacob, of course, appeared by all appearances is a great worker. It says here, though, we love this story. It says that he served 7 years for Rachel, but they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for Rachel. He loved her so much, those 7 years just flew by. He was love sick head over heels over Rachel. And so Jacob comes to Laban and says, look, my 7 years are up. I'm ready. I want my wife's hand in marriage here, my fiance. Would you give me my wife? And so, and I know everybody knows the story. It's horrible, but they have the feast, and they come out. It would have been an evening when this would have ended in the dark. But we know that Laban gives the older sister to Jacob instead of the younger. And so here comes Leah. She's got a veil over her face, and he takes her hand, and they go back and have the honeymoon. But the next day when Jacob wakes up, it's not Rachel. It is the older sister, Leah, that's been given. They were joined in marriage. And Jacob is of course upset. What in the world is this thing you have done to me, Laban? What have you done? And this is where we get the first little hint of who he's up against. Because Laban looks at Jacob. He must have got wind of what happened back home. Because he says, I don't know what the custom is around your parts, but around here, the older always comes before the younger. And that's kind of rough. But doesn't that play out? Where have you heard that before? What Jacob do? He took it away. He took that blessing away from the older. It didn't belong to him. Well, now here he kind of got what we call his comeuppance here a little bit. And so he ends up with Leah. And so Laban says, I'll tell you what, you finish out the wedding week with Leah, because you are joined in marriage now. So finish out the wedding week with her. You'll be bond forever, but finish out the week with her, and next week then I'll let you marry Rachel, and you can have her hand in marriage. But I want another 7 years out of you for her hand, for this little transaction. So what can he do? He wants Rachel as his wife, so he does this. And so then he ends up with 2 wives, and he does end up with Rachel, but now he's pledged for another 7 years. So he will work 14 years, really in the end, for Rachel's hand in marriage. And it's kind of sad, but it does say down in verse 30 of chapter 29 that Jacob, he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. It literally says that. And, I think about Leah. It would be hard, wouldn't it, to be Leah? We try to think about what could be the reasons. But I bet the main reason is probably Leah loved Jacob. I would say that Leah was around him for those first 7 years. And I bet she loved him too. Whatever the reason, she could have said something in that first wedding night. She could have spoke up, and she didn't. Maybe she feared her dad, but I really bet it was because she loved him too. And we'll see that because here comes this competition between the two of bearing children for Jacob's love. And so this is where we're going to get the 12 tribes of Israel. It's going to come from Jacob's children. And so what we'll see here, Leah, see, God blesses Leah. He didn't leave her alone in this seemingly misery. But God blesses her with children. Rachel, the one that Jacob loved, can have children. It's like a curse here, isn't it? But she can't have children. But Leah can have, and Leah starts to have children here. And her firstborn was Reuben. And so she gives birth to Reuben. And so we're going to start to see here. Leah gives birth to Reuben. And then she conceives again later on. Now, there's some time passing between this. Of course, we're bearing children here. Then she gives birth to Simeon, and then later on to Levi, and then Leah gives birth to Judah. Judah, that's the tribe that Jesus will come from eventually. But so she gives birth to 4 children. Rachel, still no kids. Rachel still doesn't have children, and Leah has 4 boys already. And how a man is blessed in these times to have a man-child, because that man is going to carry on, perpetuate the name, and perpetuate our family, and to be able to help and work. It says Rachel saw that she bore no children. Okay, she couldn't bear children, and so she gets jealous of this, of Leah having all these kids, and this is seeming this contest. It's just odd. But so what she does is Laban, when he gave wives when he gave these daughters as wives, with each of them he gave a servant, and you'll see that on there. So on that little sheet, Bilhah was the servant girl of Rachel. And Rachel says, you know what? I want children through Jacob, so I want you to marry Bilhah, take my maidservant, and have children through her, and those will be mine. Those will be my children to you, Jacob, through my maidservant. And so Jacob does this, and after Jacob does this, he has Dan, has a son named Dan, and then Naphtali is born through Bilhah the servant. Okay, now Leah sees this and says, wait a minute, this is not fair. So she goes to Jacob and says, I want you to marry Zilpah, my maidservant, and have children through her. I'm going to show you who can have children. So here now we have Leah gives Zilpah her servant to Jacob, and he has a son. Gad is born through Zilpah, and Asher is born from Zilpah. And then we get this crazy little story about mandrakes. So Reuben, the oldest son, goes out in the field near the waters, usually where they're found, and he finds these mandrakes. Pretty hard to find, rare. It's a big deal. What is the story with mandrakes? Because they start to kind of fight and bicker over these mandrakes that Reuben found. But remember, Reuben, Leah's his mom, and so he takes the mandrakes back to Leah, his mom, and says, look what I found. Well, Rachel catches wind of it and says, hey, let me have some of those mandrakes. Mandrakes are supposed to bring fertility. That's their big deal. That's what you don't read here. Mandrakes were thought to bring about fertility. And so Leah says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you some of the mandrakes, but you got to give me Jacob for a while. So we can tell that Jacob would stay with Rachel. That's the one he loved the most. That's who he stayed with. So basically, lend me my husband for a while, Rachel, and I'll give you some mandrakes so maybe you can have a child. And so do you see the dysfunction here? I mean, it's all over the place. This marrying is not multiple wives, multiple husbands. Not a good idea. So anyway, so that's what she does. And she gives those mandrakes to her. Leah, though, gets to borrow Jacob for a while, and guess what? She has Issachar. She gives birth to another son, and Leah ends up giving birth a 6th time to Zebulun. Zebulun is born of Leah, and then Leah finally, believe it or not, there's a girl, and her name is Dinah, and Dinah is born to Leah as well. But evidently, it says here, lastly it says, God remembered Rachel. Rachel, I'm sure by this point, is crying out to God. I'm sure Rachel didn't want to do this. Rachel wanted her own children. She wanted her own child from her own loins and from her own love, and God remembers her at last and gives her a son whose name is Joseph. Joseph is finally born. Joseph, and see, that's why Joseph, when we go on with this later on, that'll be the last bit. He's the last bit of the book of Genesis. And that's why Jacob was so nuts about him. Remember? And I've said partiality is never good. It's never good to have partial children you love more than the other one. But Joseph is seen as that firstborn child of his true love, the woman that he loved the most, which was Rachel. And then she will give birth again later to another son whose name is Benjamin. And that's through Jacob too. Rachel gives birth to Benjamin, and she dies in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin later. But that's later on. Right now, what we'll see as we go on with the story. So Jacob continues to work for Laban. And so 14 years for these daughters. And then he continues to work. He's going to spend a total of 20 years there with his uncle. And what happens is he's very profitable. And Laban's been reaping the blessing here. But Jacob starts to build his own wealth. And he basically says, look, we got to come up with a new arrangement here, Laban. And so if I'm going to stay and work for you, I need to get paid. And so Laban, they work out this deal, and I know you've read it where it talks about the speckled goats, the speckled sheep, and the just plain white ones. And so he says, here's what we need to do. This was the deal they struck. they said, okay, any of them that are born with spots, speckles, or stripes, those are mine, Jacob says. But any of them that are born pure white, those will be yours. And that's how we're going to go forward. That'll be my wages. Well, what happens is, when this deal is struck, the Bible tells us that Laban said, okay, it's a good deal. And then he went in the back. I'll go to the bathroom for a minute. He goes back here and he says, hey, go. So his sons run out and get all of the speckled ones and take 3 days' journey away and hide them. This is the kind of person that he's dealing with here. So then Jacob, they strike the deal. He goes out there's no speckled ones. And so here we are. But immediately God blesses him. Remember, he's got the blessing. So suddenly, that when the first time they start birthing, here they come. It's speckled. And so then Laban, it says, later on he tells us he changes these wages, changes the deal 10 different times. Laban keeps coming up with excuses and changing the wages. But he'll work for him another 6 years. He spends 20 years with Laban. And then finally God's going to tell him, he's going to say, it's time to go home. And Jacob has been blessed. Oh my goodness, he's been blessed and blessed. And I know it's got to be so dissatisfying to Laban. He can't win a roll of the dice no matter what he tries to do. God keeps blessing Jacob. So Jacob says, I've got this huge family now. It's time for me to go. God's telling me to go home. I need to go home. And so this is what we'll see happen. They take off and they're going back. They're going to go back to the promised land, back to Canaan. And so he takes off, and there's some couple little stories there. Laban pursues him. He actually has to leave when Laban's shearing his sheep, and he's kind of caught up in work. And old Jacob, he says, "I'm going to go over here," and he just heads out because he knows how Laban is. Laban will do something to trick him up, and so he has to kind of sneak away. And they end up meeting. And he comes after him. They meet. There's a little bit of a tussle there. And God tells Laban, "You leave Jacob alone. Don't touch him." And so they kind of make a covenant and split their ways. What we're going to see the next big thing, is Jacob starts to get close to home. He's traveled all these miles. As he starts to get close to home, he starts to think about the fact that when I left there, my brother swore he was going to kill me. My brother is big and bad, and I've not thought about this, but this is not sounding good. So as he gets close, what we see, Jacob, the good old deceiver, and what he is, he starts dividing up his family as he nears home. He divides up his servants. He's been blessed. He's got tons of flocks and herds. And so he divides them up into about about 4 different groups. And he says, he takes his servant and says, I want you to go forward. And if you run into my brother Esau, you tell him that all them herds I'm bringing before him, those are gifts from me to him. And then kind of let me know what happens. So that's what he does. And Jacob kind of hangs back, lets them go ahead. And that first servant comes back and says, hey, good news, your brother's coming here, and he's bringing 400 men with him. And Jacob went, oh my goodness, I'm going to die. And so here comes my brother, 400 men. So he freaks out, and he tells his other servants, you go on ahead too. And he divides up his family. And literally the Bible says, sadly, it talks about, so he takes Rachel and puts her in the back, with Joseph, his young son Joseph, whom he loves. He puts them in the back, and he gets in his mind, if Esau shows up and starts to kill him, at least some of my family will survive if I divide them into groups. I don't know what the divisions were. I'm betting the servant girls were out front. I don't know. But and all the other servant men and all that. He's going to sacrifice them if this comes to this. And so he gets them all set up, and this is the way we're going to do it. And then he kind of retreats back and kind of spends some time by himself the night before this event's going to happen. And so he's in the very back, and everybody else is out front. He sits in the back, and that night is when we have this wrestling match with this man of God that shows up. And whether this is a Christophany, whether it's Jesus Christ that's here manifest and wrestling with him, whether it's an angel of God, we don't know, but it's from heaven. This person is surely from heaven. But they have this wrestling match. What's going on here? Well, he's actually wrestling. This is metaphorical, but this is a true event. But we see it as metaphorical in the fact that he's wrestling with God, and he wrestles with this angel. If it's Jesus, whoever it is, he wrestles with him through the night, and they can't win. Nobody can win. Finally, as it's getting through the end of the night, this man of God reaches back and says it touched him on the hip, and when he does, it just kicks his hip out of place. And actually, they say that thereafter the Jews won't eat the sinew of the hip anymore. They won't eat that sinew of the hip of like a calf because of this, because it became holy because of what happened here with Jacob. But Jacob, then, and it says the Bible, the way we read in a couple places, it looks like he had a hip, a limp for the rest of his life after this event. And it was kind of like a mark put on him. He went with a limp from there on. But he wouldn't let go, right? Remember, he wouldn't let go of the heel, the ankle of this one he wrestled with. And finally he says, let me go. And he says, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. He's seeking for that blessing from God. And so this is where he is blessed of God. He tells him, okay, what's your name? And he says, I'm Jacob. Basically he says, I'm a deceiver. I'm a cheat. This is who I am. My name, I'm Jacob. And he says, no longer shall you be called Jacob. And he changed his name to Israel. And that's where we get the name Israel. He changed his name to Israel. And so it's a neat thing. And Israel, of course, the one who wrestles with God is what that name means. And because hasn't he been wrestling with God? Since the moment he left, his whole life was a life of deception. He left there, and he says, if God will preserve me, if God will do those things, God is saying, remember your vow? Remember that time you made that vow with me? And he's been wrestling with God truly at heart all of his life. And so now he heads back. Now what does he do the next day? The next day he mans up. And the Bible says he leads. He goes past his family. He goes to the front. And he leads the way the rest of the way. Now his servants he'd already sent them ahead with the gifts. So they'd already seen those couple of gifts that came through. But now he leads the family. He goes forward. And he's going to meet up with Esau. It's a beautiful thing. Think prodigal son in the New Testament. When they meet, here's Esau and 400 men. But here comes Esau running. And Esau run 20 years. They haven't seen each other in 20 years. Doesn't know what to expect, but Esau runs to him. It says he hugs him around the neck, kisses his cheek, and it's just a beautiful story here. He fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept together. I mean, it's just like the prodigal son had come home. And what we see there is a beautiful picture of redemption. Grace and mercy and redemption just come to life right there in that brother that he had deceived, in such a bad way. But Esau gives him this, and what an awesome thing it is. So, am I ahead of schedule? What time do we start tonight? We start at 7, so I'm right on time with all this morning. See, I'm going to go faster, I promise you. We'll go faster after. I'm going to start doing a survey. I'm doing too much Bible study here. But anyways, we're going to see that it is an awesome story they meet. And so, let me go on here real quick. Let's see if I've missed any of these. That's just going over the stuff I talked about. I highlighted all in. Okay. Wrestled with Jacob, yes, fighting, deceiving, characterizes Jacob's life. That's what we just talked about. Now the fight was with God. So you can read in Hosea 12, 3 and 4 is where it talks about that. It'll mention that again. That's who he was really struggling with that. Now, of course, it tells us in this scripture in Genesis that he was struggling with God. He was disabled in his hip. He went with a permanent limp after this. He had something to remind him of this event from there on out. But he really, at truth, he didn't let go of God there in the end. He struggled with him. But yet he did turn, and he gave up as far as he repented, and he depended on God going forward. We'll see that life changing going forward. It's just a beautiful story of someone. Man, that's all of us. We live a life where before I became a Christian, I struggled with God, and I did some stupid things, just like he did. All of us do these kinds of things for the most part, and so we look at Jacob and go, what a loser. But actually, it's kind of a picture of me. I did stuff like that, and then there came a time when I wrestled with God, and I realized in the end that God was right and I was wrong. And God changed me. He redeemed me. That redemption picture we see there with his brother, that could only be brought about by God. God could calm a man's heart. I mean, Esau really, we think of what Jacob did to him. You'd want to kill him too. But God changed him and gave grace there. But so he kind of gave up that struggle and when he turned to God. So it's found in 32. It talks about it there a little bit more. I don't know why I highlighted all those twice. God changed his name to Israel. It means he who strives with God. Israel means he who strives with God or wrestles with God. So Jacob would receive the blessings of God for his purposes. And that really that means that God goes ahead and tells him, reminds him again that he's got that covenant blessing, the same promise that we read about the other night about what was given to Abraham, that promise that he gave to as far as the land, and that you'll be loved and you'll curse those who are against you. I'll bless those who bless you. Through you will come blessing for all people. Your people will grow to be as large as the sand on the seashore, that sort of thing. God confirms this blessing in him. He'll send Jacob back to that place of Bethel, and that's where he kind of confirms this. And really what God is doing, he's saying, remember when you were here? Remember that vow you made? It's time to get back there. Remember when you were in the trench? Remember when you promised after that accident? Remember when you were in the hospital and you said that thing? God's saying, today's the day. And so he takes him back to Bethel and they confirm this. But for I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. That's what Jacob says to his brother Esau. That's not to God. He says that to Esau. And you think about it, it's kind of powerful, but he says, for I have seen God face to face and my life is preserved. He's not talking about, when he says this, he says it in chapter 33, about verse 10 here. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. When you think about talking to someone, they got their back to you. When someone's got their back to you, you don't know what they're thinking. You don't know what they're feeling. You don't know if they're mad, if they're happy. You don't know anything about them until they turn around. And you're like, okay, you're cool, or something's wrong, We can tell by their facial expression. And when he says, when I saw you, Esau, I didn't know what to expect. But when I saw your face, it was like seeing the face of God. Because of the fact that you loved me, you were happy, you accepted me when I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve your grace. I didn't deserve you to run and hug me and kiss me. So he said it was like seeing the face of God. And that's what he means by that. Okay, so... that there I just talked about the different... Did I give you that one? I didn't, did I? I did give you that one? Okay. This is just talking about the different deception, what deception does. What does deception do? What's the fallout from being a deceiver, from deceiving people, from being a person of deception? It destroys trust. And we can think about this in relationships, with personal relationships, in marriage relationships, in mom, dad, son, child, just friends, buddies, anything. You think about, what does deception do? These are the things that it destroys trust. It creates insecurity, creates fear. I can't trust you. If I can't trust you, what does that do? And so we think about trust. Now, trust, in Deuteronomy 32:4, I tried to give some verses there that would back it up. Truthfulness is a manifestation of who God is. And it's Jesus, he equated himself with truth. He is the truth, the way, and the life. He's the door, that doorway to heaven, and as exemplified in Jacob's ladder. Honesty. Honesty is consistent with the character and nature of God. So honesty should always characterize us as believers. That's who we should be with our friends and with our colleagues. When we're in business and we have those business transactions, we as Christians we always try to establish a sense of trust and honesty. People will deal with you if they know they can trust you in business. They'll bring their business back to you. And just same thing with friends. If my friend knows that they can trust me, that I'll be there for them, and that I'm not going to lie to them, they'll come to me with their deepest need, and we'll think of that bond of friendship you'll create through trust. And so that's just kind of a little bit of what we was talking about there. And I don't know why I've done that. I really highlighted it way too much. Was that all in my head? Oh goodness! Did I talk about? I'm sorry, I talked about it, but I didn't show this one either, did I? So the sons of Jacob were the ones who inherited Canaan and became the nation of Israel. We know that. So the 12 sons, and I didn't mention there. So when it come down to the sons, Jacob one day will end up blessing Joseph's 2 sons. Really the blessing just goes to the son, not to the grandchildren. But Jacob will do his thing. We'll see it here at the end, probably next week. We'll see the end of this. And this is where Joseph will end up blessing Joseph's 2 sons, 2 children, Ephraim and Manasseh. And they kind of take the place. They kind of step in and they become 2 of the tribes represented. It's kind of neat. He'll end up switching his hands at the last minute. And he blesses he'll end up blessing Ephraim more than Manasseh, like as the firstborn. So, and really Ephraim was born last, so Manasseh should have been the firstborn. He does that. It's like it implements talks about his own life. You know, he was the younger, and he got the blessing. He switches his hands at the last minute with Ephraim and Manasseh and gives the blessing on the youngest instead of the oldest, just something he does. But anyways, that shows those sons of Jacob, the 12 sons of Jacob, each of them becomes the tribes of Israel. And so if you know the 12 sons of Jacob, you know who the 12 tribes of Israel are, all going forward throughout the Bible. Remember, and this, I think I got it up here, Levi, the tribe of Moses and Aaron that become the priests. Judah, I said that earlier, the tribe through which Jesus Christ came from. So these are the men that basically they can say, what do I got up here? Benjamin, I think. Yeah, Benjamin, the youngest son of Rachel, who we haven't seen born yet. With Judah's tribe, they become that southern half when the kingdom divides later on. But Paul came from the tribe of Benjamin. You know, King Saul came from the tribe of Benjamin. And so there is a thing there of respect. You know, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, or I'm from the tribe of Asher. You know, but these are represented by the 12 sons of the man now named Israel. Jacob took on the name Israel, and so he's kind of that father, that patriarch of the tribe. All right, so that's kind of neat. That's how it all comes together, and we will. I'm determined. This next time we come here, we're going to finish. We'll finish Genesis, and I may even try to get Job in there. And I know that's a big step, but I know I can do Job fairly quickly, and I'm confident we could do it. I'm just crawling along. I'm going to get into my new mindset here, so we can speed things up a little bit. So apologize for going slow through this beginning part. We will, I promise you, start moving quick here as we get going. But Genesis is foundational. There's so much to it. We know where the 12 tribes of Israel came from now, you know. And it's pivotal to know some of these truths, some of these foundational truths that will help us later on as we're reading through the stories of the kingdoms of the north and the south and the fightings that are going on inner tribes and why those happen. And it is very interesting as we'll see some things happening later. So. All right, that's what we got tonight. So, anybody got anything to